took the power of being the co-chair and assigned me a talk slot. So, all right. Okay. So, right. So we talked about nudges yesterday a little bit, and the way I've structured this talk is essentially in two parts: nudges to think, and then audits to investigate. So the first part of the talk is more about what's the good part of algorithms, and then what new interactions could be designed to make the human critically think while they are interacting with news and information. And the second part, the audit part, is more about focusing on the not so good part. So some of the things which Jenna was talking earlier, like how do we audit algorithmic systems to find what are the things that is wrong with them. And in this particular case, I'm going to talk about auditing search algorithms for misinformation. And when I was creating this talk, and after I gave the title of the talk, and then I created it. So I was like, how do I tie both these things together? And I think David Laser's Science op-ed article on this quote from that article really ties these two concepts together. So he says that we do need to create a new field around social algorithms. So all of these talks, all of these concepts are around that social algorithm, and why that is slightly different from when we think about just algorithm in standalone way, because these social algorithms interplays not just the computational code, but also the social interactions of real human beings. All right, so we talked about nudges a lot, and so just to give a little bit of background, so the concept of nudges, when I read it, it comes from Sunstein and Thaler's famous book, also goes by the same name. And in this book, they basically focus on this idea that people do not really make rational choices, and oftentimes their decisions are influenced by their social interactions, by their cognitive biases, by certain heuristics, and so on. And they also mention this aspect of two systems of thinking, the reflective system and the automatic system. And as the name suggests, so the automatic system is when people make these quick, snap decisions about reading news, about going to Twitter, tweeting, retweeting. And then reflective decision is where people think and make some conscious decisions. So in real world scenario, this could be when you are deciding whether you should take this job offer versus not, right? So and this also has parallels to Dan Kahneman's book Thinking Fast and Slow. So Sunstein talks about this concept of nudges, and he uses this concept to say that the nudges could be a way to steer human behavior in pro-social manner, right? So to steer civic behavior. So a good way to think about it is an example where how cafeteria, if they design a nudge where healthy food are placed at the eye level, and then the junk food items are present at the lower level. So now the user is nudged towards the healthy food item, but they also have a choice if they want to go for the non-healthy food item. So essentially, nudges are these choice architectures where you're free to ignore the nudge, but you are also able to make the choice to opt for the better civic behavior. And he makes this argument that if we go for these choice-based architecture, it's actually better rather than mandating the people or the humans to do certain things versus not do certain things. So and this sort of nudge scenario has worked very well in promoting healthy, pro-social activities, anti-obesity policies. I think it's also used in financial regulation, environmental policies, and like a bunch of different scenarios. So we were thinking, what if we actually bring these concepts of nudges back to the online social platforms, and to kind of, is there a way to use this concept of nudges to make people critically think while they are accessing news and information? So, I mean, this is a real study, and much more, smaller scale rather than the big Sunstein study across a huge population of people. In this study, we basically try to do like two very simple nudges. First is called the emphasize, and the second one is called the de-emphasize nudge. So what the emphasize nudge does is, if the news that you're reading on Twitter, if it's coming from mainstream media, and many people have questioned that news, we sort of nudge the user by emphasizing that aspect. So the emphasis appears as a yellow background. And the de-emphasize is essentially if it's coming from an alternative website, in this case 100%fedup.com, it shows the user that it kind of hides that news, not really hides, but blurs it, making it hard for the reader to read, and also shows this tooltip that the source might be not credible. And then we poll the user for, how, based on these nudges, what's the credibility perception of this news source. So this is a quick demo for how this tool works in practice. We call it feed reflects. Essentially, this is a way for people to reflect on their feed. So yeah, the user installs it on Twitter, and now he or she is going through their feed. And so this is Fox News, and we consider this as mainstream, and so people might disagree with that, but that's a discussion for another time. But essentially, in this particular news article, people have questioned through the replies in Twitter. So the algorithm computes that, yes, this is a questionable content also coming from mainstream. It highlights it. And then the user has a way to enter their credibility perception for that news item. The next item, which is blurred out, that's coming from Breitbart, and we had an in-house journalist who actually, so that's Mike Harney, who made us decide, okay, this is not mainstream, this could be non-mainstream, and so it is blurred out, and then again, the user enters the credibility perception for this news article. So we are trying to see whether these sort of nudges has any effect if the user is exposed to this nudge versus not exposed to this nudge. How do they respond in terms of the credibility perception of this of news items on their Twitter feed? So this is the short version of the result. So of course, we ran into several difficulty in terms of recruiting people, but the short version of the result is the nudges worked. So what you see here is that difference in the treatment and the control group. So the treatment group, the difference is actually statistically significantly different. So mainstream content was non-mainstream content was rated significantly lower in credibility compared to mainstream content for treatment. But the same thing is not, the same effect is not there for control group. So in terms of the quant results, we were excited. So that was good. And then we also talked to the users, and we saw that same aspect of reflective thinking that I was talking about earlier was actually shown in the way they were interacting with these nudges. So this is a user, and this is when we coded their interviews, we found this what we call the stop and think aspect, right? So this user says that normally, like sometimes you scroll past news, but this would be highlighted or faded out. It would catch your eye, make you look a little more into it instead of just reading past the title, right? And then people also engaged a little bit more. They clicked and read the news a bit more. We also found there was effect of questionnaire. So because of the questionnaire itself, people were actually trying to, this user says that they are evaluating whether this news is coming from a biased perspective or not. So it made them actively think while they were answering the question. So that was all good. So this gave us some insight that the nudges which Sunston was making them work on offline scenario, there is some potential of making them work in online scenarios for addressing probably these potential concerns with misinformation and fake news and so on. But the story is not all that simple, right? So these are the failures on the right side, the right side plot. So when we try to analyze the same data considering the demographics of the user, so whether they are Democrat, Independent, or Republican, the effects were different. So for Democrats and Independent, of course, we do see the nudges did work, but it was a failure when it came to the Republican user. And I don't have answers as to how to address this problem, and our reviewers were also not happy about this. However, I mean, there are some questions which came up. So maybe when we are thinking of these design technologies to bring humans and make them, give the agency for them to understand how the algorithm is working, maybe there is no one size fits all. Maybe we cannot, or maybe there is, and we don't know what that generic algorithmic nudge would be. And there are a few more questions that when I was thinking about this more deeply that came up. Maybe the answer to it is we have to design more heuristic-based, people-centric nudges, more like personalized nudges. But then the question is, should we really do that? Should we really design these personalized nudges? Because then that opens a whole other kind of forms of problems, right? And then the third and final thing that I'm debating is this question about reflective thinking versus automatic thinking. So reflective thinking is costly. Like for every small decisions, you cannot really wait and keep reflecting before making that decision, which is why people go to automatic thinking. So when we are designing this technology, the human AI technology, where should we draw the line? When should we think about triggering the system, triggering the reflective system versus triggering the automatic system? And then how should we do that more efficiently? And I think finally the question is, I mean, should we as algorithmic designers, should be taking that control and doing it the way we want to, flip the switch from reflective versus automatic triggering of the system? Okay, so switching gears to the second part. So auditing to investigate algorithmic systems for all sorts of different problems that they have. And I'm going to talk about the search systems for misinformation. So it was good that Jenna kind of set the stage about some of these topics, about the problems with algorithms. So this is a book from the 90s. This is Fix's book from the 90s, which kind of talks about that auditing has been there for a while, right? And then nowadays people are talking a lot about auditing algorithms. So this talks about measuring of discrimination in America. And the first code on the left side on there, it says, just to give the context, why auditing is an important concept and then why it's difficult to do it in the first place on systems. So here's the code. I'm going to read through it. So when a black or Hispanic is treated worse than a white in comparable circumstances, how can we be sure that the differential treatment is because of the race or because of some other factor, extraneous factor, which we are not measuring, right? So how do we measure that through our auditing techniques that this is exactly the factor because of which discrimination is happening? So coming back to the concept of misinformation and what we were trying to measure here is how can we audit search algorithms? So our only focus here is the search systems, different types of search algorithms. And then what we are measuring is misinformation. So essentially is whatever the search algorithm is returning, is that different based on if you are a user from a rural area versus an urban area. So the measure is your extent of misinformation that is being returned is based on your geographic location. So we are still running these, so I don't have all the results, but this is just to motivate what the problem is. So this is how the Google's search platform looked like a couple of years ago. So if you looked for the term precedence in the Klan, the first result is a list of 5 people, and it actually points to that website, a bogus website, and this is an incorrect result. But this was the first result that got returned. And there are like many examples like this. So this is when I was looking for, this is from last night, when I just typed in 9/11 conspiracy, not even the word conspiracy in full. The second result, the first result is of course debunking. So it shows me debunked conspiracy theories. But then the second and third results are all pro-conspiracy video. Then the next example, again from last night, vaccine. I didn't even type in the whole word causes, and then I see all these various results. Vaccine cause asthma, vaccine cause peanut allergy, so all sorts of vaccine scares, right? And this has been talked by lots of bloggers. But the question is, we have not really measured how bad the problem is, right? And where the problem, what are the measures where the problem occurs? Another aspect that has not been actually talked about a lot is taking this concept from web search algorithms to social media search algorithms. So my background is social computing, so I'm very much fascinated about doing the same kind of study on social platforms. So if you do the same search for a different topic, chemtrails on Reddit search, so Reddit, Twitter, all of them have search feature. So chemtrail, for those of you who don't know, it's a conspiracy theory. So whenever flights fly in high altitude and they leave these condensation trails, right? And then there is this theory that these trails are essentially chemicals sprayed by the government to control the public. So and there's like a whole thread and communities who just talk about that. So essentially, if you search for chemtrails, here what you see, it's not just pointing you to a set of search results, but it's also pointing you to a set of communities, subreddits, and users who are where you can basically bond with them and talk about these same topics, right? So the question is how bad the problem is, and then the next question is, so far search algorithms, of course, it's returning all relevant results, but there is no concept of credibility or accuracy, right? And in terms of should the algorithm return these results, although being relevant, they are not really credible. So we did a bunch of experiments. Quickly going to go through this, essentially setting up 3 accounts. First is a control account, which search for the word chemtrail video, an experimental account treatment, which searches for the query chemtrail video, and then goes and watches a pro-conspiracy video on that topic. And then the third account behaves similar to the experiment 2 account, where it watches searches, but then it watches a debunking video. So it's expected that for the account 2, you're going to get more recommendation and more search results, which is pushing you towards the pro-conspiracy video, and which is what we found when we analyzed those search results and recommended results. But what was scary and fascinating at the same time was the third result. So basically what we found is even when that account watches for debunking video, and if it keeps doing that for a few 10 iterations, we found at some point the recommended videos start going towards pro-conspiracy. It's no longer debunking videos that are being recommended. So that was a scary thing. And so my students yesterday actually presented his poster showing how easily through YouTube you could get into this bubble of conspiracy theory. So I'm not going to talk about that. But just in closing, the questions is, how do we even measure and understand these sort of black box algorithm where the algorithm is hosted by these powerful companies, right? So as an outsider, how do we do it? How do we audit the algorithm without taking the system out of context, right? So that's the auditing in the loop. And then I think another very important question is, how do we do it reliably? How do we do it ethically? And how do we do it legally? So the question of legality comes into picture because by the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, if you're scraping data, you can actually be put behind bars, and there are a lot more rules, and we can talk about that in the workshop discussion session. And then the second thing that I mention is, I call it running the right sniff test. So we talked a lot about discrimination, fairness, misinformation in this my talk. But are we missing out something? Are we missing out other aspects that we really need to study, and those are already problematic in the current algorithms? We don't know. And then the final one, I think, is the hardest problem, which probably we should talk about. How do we, as academics, how do we maintain and sustain these regular auditing platforms? Because this is expensive. So with the limited resources that we have, how do we do it? Because it's also necessary to do regular, frequent audits as on these platforms over and over again, right? So, right, with that, these are the current students and few collaborators. Mike is in the room. I didn't put his picture, but he has been a very great collaborator for the first project. And with that, I'll end my talk. Happy to take questions.
You have questions?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is a very interesting topic. Yeah, when I saw the book,